Welcome to Golf Training Hacks. So how do the pros get those solid iron shots? Well, there's two aspects to that, and it all starts with delofting the club. When you deloft the club, you can get a more solid shot on your irons. Now here's why. When you deloft the club, you're coming into impact on a straighter line because you're keeping lag through impact. So when you're delofting the club, you've kept your lag into impact and your hands are ahead of the club face. That's going to get the club face to enter the strike zone on a flatter line, as opposed to, let's say, flipping at the club, flipping at the ball, which is going to be a more circular pattern. So obviously, if you're coming to impact on a flatter line, you're going to get a more solid shot. The second thing is, when you deloft the club, you're taking the angle out of the club face. So as the club moves this way, you're creating more of an angle and you're getting more of that slicing, glancing blow at the golf ball. That's going to create the backspin that takes all the distance off the ball. It's just not a solid shot. The less angle you have on your club face, obviously, the more solid the contact. So those are the two aspects. You're delofting the club. By delofting the club, you're coming into impact on a straighter line, and you're taking the angle off of the club, and that makes a more solid contact point. Now, what does that look like? Well, at impact, it looks something like this. So your hands are ahead of the club, you've rotated through the shot, this hip is in internal rotation, and this knee, or rather this ankle, knee, hip, and shoulder are in one line. So you're going to look something like this. And as you go through the shot and fully release leg out in front of impact point, you're going into more internal rotation. Now that's the key. You have to have internal rotation capacity in your hips. If your hips are stuck, if they're stiff, and you can't move like this into impact, and you end up being square to the impact or square to the ball, it's really tough to deloft the club. It's very awkward to try to deloft the club when you're not moving your hips. So what's more likely going to happen? Well, you're probably going to stand up at impact and flip at the ball. And that's not going to create a solid contact point. So we want to have stronger and more mobile hips. Now in this video, we're going to work on two areas, your glute max and your hamstrings, because they work together. And they work together to allow you to rotate your hips more effectively. But when your glute max is weak, what happens is it destabilizes your hip. Now, one of the responsibilities of the glute max is to keep your hip from rotating too far forward. That's called anterior pelvic tilt. Now, if your glute max is weak, your hamstrings, because they're attached to the bottom of your pelvis and the top of your shin bone, the glute max is going to take up the slack of the weakness of the hamstrings are going to take up the slack of the weakness of your glute max, and they're going to try to pull that pelvis back into alignment. So look what's happening. When your pelvis tilts forward, your hamstrings are stretched more than they would normally be, but they're also overworked because they're trying to pull that pelvis back into alignment. That makes for stiff and tight hamstrings, and it limits your ability to rotate. If you have a weak glute max and stiff hamstrings, that makes it tougher to rotate. So we're going to work on improving the pliability and extensibility of our hamstrings and improve the strength of the glute max. Now here's the important point. You want to improve glute max strength first, because if you can become successful at improving your hamstring flexibility or extensibility, pliability, whatever you want to call it, you're actually destabilizing your hip. Because if this is weak and this becomes lengthened, then what is stabilizing that pelvis? Well, you've just taken away what's really holding this pelvis in place, which is your hamstrings. So we want to strengthen the glute max first, and then we can work on some exercises or techniques that get some more pliability into those stiff and overworked hamstrings. So let's get started. Hip strength and glute max strength is so important for the golf swing. It's also important to organize your hips so that they're aligned correctly. Now, we've all seen this basic movement, I'm sure. It's a hip bridge. It's very simple. So a hip bridge is simply raising your hips off the ground. Now, we're going to do this for an isometric hold. You can hold it for as long as you want, but let's go for 10 seconds. So that's roughly 10 seconds. The way you can make this more challenging is you can put bands around your knees, raise up, and press out on the bands. That really fires up the glutes. Now, you'll know you're doing this wrong, or you'll know that you have not enough strength in your glute max if when you drive your hips up, you have too much tension in your hamstrings. Now, my glute max is on, but my hamstrings are very loose. So it really is focused on the glute max muscle and not the hamstrings. If you're feeling cramping up in your hamstrings, you need some more strength in your glute max. Now, you can do this in reps too. You can raise up and come back down. You can raise up and come back down. The more advanced version of this would be to do a single leg hip bridge. So you're going to raise up. Now this leg comes up. You can hold it like that, or you can do pumps like this. So a single leg hip bridge would be this. Now you can hold that for the amount of time you want. Let's hold that for 10 seconds. 1/1000. So that's about 10 seconds. If you'd like, you can just come in and out of it, or you can do it with a single leg pump, or you can combine it all. You can come up, single leg pump, come back, and drop down. Up, single leg pump, back and down. Another version would be holding this out for 10 seconds. And come back. Glute max strength is very important. Your glute max helps align your hips. It helps prevent anterior pelvic tilt, which throws everything off up and down the kinetic chain. So getting that glute max strength is key to hip alignment. It's also important to get that powerful drive in your golf swing. In this video, we're going to use a roller to work on the higher portion of your hamstring. Now, there are a lot of muscles that converge into your hips, and the hamstrings are one of them. In this video, though, we want to work closer to the bottom of the pelvis and the tendinous junction that goes into the pelvis from your hamstrings. You don't always have to work on like the muscle belly. Sometimes it's really good to work on the areas that are closer to the joint, and that's what we're going to be doing here. So we're going to use the roller, and we're going to keep the roller high up on our hamstring. So you're going to sit on a table or a chair or some relatively hard surface, and then you're going to put the roller high up on the hamstring, and you're just going to start to move. So you're going to just try to extend your leg in different positions. And now I want to breathe when I'm doing this, right? It's so important to breathe. Inhale and exhale through your nose. Now, the exhale should be roughly twice as long as your inhale. You don't have to be so dogmatic about it, but if you're inhaling for 4 seconds, you might want to exhale for 8. 3, 6, 2, 4, but try to keep that ratio. Now, if this feels like there's just not enough pressure, well, you can put more pressure on your leg. Use your forearm, your hand, and then extend. Now, I find that when I put a lot of pressure, it is really hard to extend, which may be what you want to do. I mean, that, you may feel like you need that kind of pressure. So when I go off to the lateral side of my hamstring, I have a really tough time to extend. You can see my leg is almost shaking. Release, and then it's not so bad. So maybe I actually want to spend some time doing this and really get some pressure in there so that I can make a real change. And if it hurts too much, you know, you just use your leg and your hand to release it a little bit more. It's up to you. You know how you feel. It's up to you to figure out where you need the most work. Breathing is so important. Inhale and exhale through your nose. You should release twice as long as you inhale, as a general rule. So this is a high hamstring release. So if you found that helpful, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We'd really appreciate it. And don't forget to check out other videos on the channel to help you improve your movement quality and keep that youthful fluid swing while staying injury-free.